secular researchers such as Rosalie David and Flinders Petrie have noted many finds dated to the Middle Kingdom period, which correspond to the Exodus narrative. For example, pyramids built of mud and straw bricks, and both written and physical evidence that Asiatic people were enslaved in Egypt during this time.
You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy. That is why they are crying out, "Let us go and sacrifice to our God."
Skeletons of infants of 3 months old and younger, usually several in one box, buried under homes in a slave town called Kohan, corresponding to Pharaoh's slaughter of Hebrew infants.
When you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill him. But if it is a girl, let her live.
Masses of houses and shops in Kohan, abandoned so quickly that tools, household implements, and other possessions were left behind. The findings suggest the abandonment was total, hasty, and done on short notice, consistent with the sudden exit ordered in the wake of Passover.
Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. During the night Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, "Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds, as you have said, and go, and also bless me." The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for otherwise, they said, "We will all die." So the people took their dough before the yeast was added, and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs, wrapped in clothing. With the dough the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they baked loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves.
The Pharaoh of the 12th dynasty, Amenemhat had no surviving sons, and his daughter Sobekneferu had no children. This would explain why she took in a Hebrew child Moses as a substitute. After Moses fled, there would have been no heirs, and the 13th dynasty began after Sobekneferu died.
Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, and sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian.
The 13th dynasty, in which the Exodus would have occurred, is often described by later records as one of bedlam and confusion, and only a few monuments of this period survive. The rods used by court advisors which look like snakes. This corroborates the sleight of hand done by Pharaoh's advisors.
So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one threw down his staff, and it became a snake. but Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs.
The Epur Papyrus, most recently dated to the 13th dynasty, is a work of poetry stating, "Plague stalks through the land and blood is everywhere. Nay, but the river is blood. Gates, columns and walls are consumed with fire. The son of the highborn man is no longer to be recognized. The stranger people from outside are come into Egypt. Nay, but corn has perished everywhere." When Egypt was invaded by the Hyksos, possibly the stranger people mentioned by Epur, they offered little or no resistance, something which makes sense only if Egypt's armies and economy had been recently devastated.
The Israelites did as Moses instructed and asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people, and they gave them what they asked for. So they plundered the Egyptians. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may flow back over the Egyptians and their chariots and horsemen." Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and at daybreak the sea went back to its place. The Egyptians were fleeing toward it, and the Lord swept them into the sea. The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived.
Neferhotep I, pharaoh of the 13th dynasty, was not succeeded by his son, Neferhotep, but by his brother Subkot IV. This harmonizes with the Passover death of Pharaoh's firstborn.
So Moses said, "This is what the Lord says. About midnight I will go throughout Egypt. Every firstborn son in Egypt will die. From the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn son of the female slave who is at her handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle as well."
A lack of a mummy of Neferhotep I himself, indicating he could have been among those wiped out at the Red Sea.
The water flowed back and covered the chariots and horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea. Not one of them survived.
So non-biblical evidence shows us there was a large Hebrew workforce in Egypt, which left suddenly at the beginning of a time of chaos, under a pharaoh who left neither an heir nor a mummy, after which time Egypt was weak and ravaged. This evidence is found in inscriptions, monuments, excavations, and other physical forms. Where biblical details intersect with historical evidence, they match.